Every household holds two kinds of silent girls. Those whose hush signals compliance, and those whose hush signals a mind quietly recording everything around her. Most guardians never tell the two apart until the day a folder gets pushed across a breakfast table and the daughter finally raises her eyes. That's the instant a mother discovers she raised the second kind, not the first. I'm Sienna Whitmore. I turned 18 on the 15th of April 2026. 9 hours into being a legal adult, my own mother tried smiling her way into stealing my inheritance over a stack of pancakes. What stung most is that she genuinely expected gratitude for it. But to understand that kitchen scene, you need the 6 months that came before it. All the way back to the first caution my grandfather ever left me, and the moment I realized that quiet people absorb far more than anyone gives them credit for. It was October, the kind of cold that switches porch lights on before supper. The trees outside had gone thin and exhausted looking. I was tidying my room since my mother couldn't stand even minor clutter. On the top shelf sat the cedar box my grandfather Theodore had given me for my 17th birthday. His final gift to me in person. Months had passed since I'd last opened it. When I lifted the lid, the scent of cedar and aging paper drifted out. Inside waited a flattened maple leaf, an old snapshot of my grandparents beaming beside their garden, and a heavy, sealed white envelope. Across the front, in his careful hand, were these words: "Open only if something feels wrong with your mother before you turn 18. Call Nathaniel Sterling right away." I stared at that envelope until my eyes ached. Grandpa had been gone more than a year and somehow he'd already seen this coming. Downstairs, papers were being shuffled slowly across the kitchen table. My mother's voice low. Victor's voice lower still. I couldn't make out words, but something inside my chest cinched tight anyway. I slid the envelope back into its box, shut the lid with care, and went downstairs as though nothing had happened. That was my mother's first miscalculation. She assumed my silence meant I was oblivious. It meant I was gathering proof. My father, Benjamin Whitmore, died when I was 10. He drove a silver Ford Ranger. One foggy morning in November of 2018, another truck crossed the center line on Route 30. A state trooper came to our door holding his hat to his chest. My mother screamed once and then turned practical. Within a week she was browsing kitchen renovations online. 2 years after that she married Victor Langford, a contractor with a booming laugh, a loud truck and louder opinions, and brought along his daughter Cassidy, 2 years my junior and talkative enough for the both of us. I learned the rules of that house fast. Tears irritated my mother. Crying got you labeled dramatic. Laughing too hard got you labeled attention-seeking. Any spark of excitement got flattened somehow. By 12 I'd stopped letting emotion show around her. Not because I didn't feel things, but because feelings had become ammunition in that house. My grandmother Eleanor noticed first. She'd sit with me on the porch swing and murmur that I didn't have to be tough every single second there. My grandfather noticed too, though he never pushed or cornered me, he just made room. Tomato plants, books, quiet mornings, a kind of safety and stillness. My mother read my quiet as obedience. Really, it was observation. And people who observe closely tend to forget nothing. Dinner followed the same script nightly. 6:30, Victor through the garage door, boots off in the laundry room, keys dropped hard on the counter, complaints about work, my mother already pouring his wine before he asked. Cassidy chattering non-stop. One March Sunday she announced she'd gotten into Bucknell, and Victor nearly cheered. My mother squeezed Cassidy's wrist gently and promised they'd work out tuition together. I kept cutting my chicken. Then I mentioned quietly that I'd been accepted to Penn State the day before. The table went still. Not with shock, just disinterest. My mother offered a polite, "That's nice, sweetheart." Victor shrugged that college was a scam anyway. Then my mother added a phrase I'd started hearing constantly. "We talk about my future closer to my birthday." Never a celebration. Always a discussion like a business meeting. Victor lifted his wineglass and muttered that family money ought to stay with family. My mother shot him a sharp look, but too late. I'd caught it. Always caught it. My grandmother died when I was 14, breast cancer claiming her the second time around. In her hospital bed she squeezed my hand and told me I was a good girl and not to let anyone rewrite that truth. I held it together until the parking lot. My grandfather sat beside me while I fell apart in the passenger seat, never once telling me to settle down or accusing me of being theatrical. He simply let me grieve. After she passed he grew quieter, not cold, just dimmer, like a lamp slowly turned down. The summer I turned 16 I stayed with him 2 months. Cooking breakfast, reading beside his chair, watering tomatoes, sometimes saying almost nothing to each other. It was the safest I'd ever felt. Then one September morning his heart gave out. He was 78. At his funeral my mother cried with perfect composure. Measured tears, a controlled voice, shoulders shaking just enough. Victor checked his phone in the back row. 2 weeks later the will was read and everything shifted. My grandfather had left me a trust worth roughly $680,000. Stocks, cash, proceeds from land sales. Enough to reshape an entire life. It would transfer to me in full on my 18th birthday, overseen by attorney Nathaniel Sterling. Tucked inside the paperwork was a handwritten note in 6 words. Your choice. Your life. Love, Grandpa. My mother stared at that note far too long, not with sorrow but with calculation, like she was already solving an equation in her head. That's when the scheming began. 6 months before my birthday, a man in a gray suit started showing up every Wednesday afternoon. Same Lexus, same leather briefcase, same rehearsed smile. My mother gave him a new identity each visit. Insurance agent, financial advisor, a friend of Victor's. The story never held steady. One snowy January afternoon I came home from the library early. Stepping into the mudroom I heard voices from the kitchen. My mother was saying that once I signed, everything else would happen automatically. Victor asked what if I hesitated. She laughed softly and said I wouldn't, that I always listened. I stood frozen, snow melting off my boots. Then I opened the door loudly on purpose and called out that I was home. Papers shuffled fast. By the time I walked in the table sat empty. My mother's smile came too bright, offering cocoa for a snow day. On the counter, peeking from beneath her purse, I spotted embossed lettering. A firm name, something about family wealth planning. Cassidy wandered in and asked casually if it was about my money. Victor snapped at her to go upstairs. My mother handed me cocoa with trembling hands and called me such a good girl. That was the moment my confusion ended. I didn't have every detail yet, but I had enough. That Friday I finally opened my grandfather's envelope, walking alone to Willow Creek Park under a gray sky and cold wind. The letter inside ran a single page. He'd hoped he was wrong, but if I was reading this, something had gone wrong with my mother. Nathaniel Sterling had managed his affairs for 30 years and knew everything. I had the right to protect myself, the right to choose. A phone number sat at the bottom. My hand shook dialing it. A receptionist answered first. Then a calm, older voice came on the line, telling me he'd been expecting my call. Nobody had ever said that to me with such certainty. He asked me to come to Lancaster the following week and told me to tell my mother it concerned college financial aid. And he added, don't change anything at home, not my expression, not my routine, not a single word. I agreed. His office sat above a brick storefront downtown, crowded with books, a green banker's lamp, stacks of files, a wilting plant near the window. He spoke slowly, plainly, like he respected me enough to be honest. He walked me through trusts, beneficiaries, guardianship, legal control. Then he told me my mother had been working with an attorney named Vincent Blackwell, and slid a folder toward me. The Whitmore Family Financial Unification Agreement, my name across the top page. I read it in silence, my stomach going colder with each line. It would make my mother co-trustee. It would hand her financial authority over my inheritance. Part of the trust would funnel into something called Langford Whitmore Holdings LLC. The signature line was dated 2 months before my 18th birthday, while I was still a minor. I looked up slowly. They wanted this signed before I turned 18. He nodded. 4 months. 4 months of cheerful breakfasts and birthday talk while they quietly built a legal cage around me. They were going to take it, I whispered. He didn't cushion the truth. Yes, they were. The honesty stung worse than the betrayal itself. Then he leaned in and said my grandfather had prepared for exactly this. That sentence changed something in me. For the first time I stopped feeling powerless. He laid out my options. Build an entirely new trust, irrevocable and protected, run by a corporate trustee with no access for my mother, Victor, or anyone else. Once signed, he said not even guilt could undo it. I thought of my mother's tears, the manipulation, all the ways she knew how to make me feel selfish for existing. Then I told him to go ahead. We built it clause by clause over the following 2 months, and I named it the Eleanor Trust after my grandmother. He smiled at the name and wrote it down. We locked out my mother, Victor, and Cassidy from any legal control entirely. The trust would cover education, housing, medical needs, emergencies. Nothing else. No family loans, no temporary favors, no guilt dressed up as sacrifice. One afternoon my Aunt Abigail called out of nowhere. My father's younger sister, sharp-voiced and sharp-minded. She told me my father had tried to protect me 6 months before he died, wanting a trust set up for me until my mother fought him out of it. My chest tightened. I asked how much. About $450,000 in life insurance, she said. I closed my eyes. He tried. He'd really tried. Abigail told me gently that I wasn't the first person my mother had manipulated, just the first with a grandfather who'd planned ahead. After that call, my doubts disappeared completely. The Sunday before my birthday, my mother made pot roast, her special occasion meal. Over dinner, I casually asked the difference between a trust and a family account. She lit up immediately, calling trusts cold and full of lawyers eating up the money. Victor added that family money belonged in family hands, then let slip the phrase corporate trustee. Words he'd never used around me before. I smiled and kept eating while alarm bells rang inside me. Cassidy mentioned that her mom said the money was meant to help everyone. Silence fell hard. My mother recovered fast, insisting she just meant families supporting each other. But it was too late. Cassidy had exposed more than she realized. 2 days before my birthday, my mother threw a large dinner at Willow Creek Country Club. 15 guests, church friends, neighbors, business contacts. Over dessert, she stood with her wine glass raised, toasting her brave daughter who'd be making very smart decisions the next day. Everyone clapped. Across the room, alone with a salad and a leather briefcase, sat a man I recognized from Sterling's description. Vincent Blackwell, watching, waiting. I smiled through the rest of dinner anyway. The night of my birthday, I locked my bedroom door. At 11:52 p.m. I opened my laptop for a video call. Nathaniel Sterling first, then a representative from a trust services firm, then an online notary. At midnight, I signed my full legal name, one careful letter at a time. Minutes later, the transfer was confirmed complete. The Eleanor Trust, fully funded and irrevocable, protected for good. Sterling looked into the camera and wished me a happy birthday, telling me my grandfather would be proud. After the call ended, I sat in silence a long while. For the first time in months, I slept peacefully. Morning arrived too fast. By 7:45, the kitchen smelled like pancakes. My mother wore her pink robe and a bright birthday smile. Victor sat at the table, Cassidy scrolled her phone, and there it was, the manila folder waiting beside my plate. I sat down calmly. Candles flickered on the pancakes. My mother hugged me a little too tightly and wished me happy birthday. I thanked her and ate a couple of bites. Then she folded her hands and said now that I was 18, we should talk about Grandpa's money. The folder slid across the table, smooth and rehearsed. I opened it slowly, the exact same documents Sterling had shown me. Co-trusteeship, power of attorney, asset transfers, Cassidy's tuition tucked in too. Every page reeked of betrayal. My mother's smile held steady at first, then flickered into irritation, then nerves as 5 minutes passed with me reading every line. Victor finally snapped that I didn't need to read every word. I told him calmly that I liked understanding what I signed. I turned another page. Mom, I asked quietly, what exactly is Langford Whitmore Holdings LC? Her smile twitched. Just a family company, tax stuff, she said, though she couldn't recall when it was formed. Victor cut in, telling me to just sign it. I looked at him and mentioned he'd referenced his guy earlier. His jaw tightened. My mother jumped in, insisting this was all for my protection. I kept reading. Version 4.3 generated 4 months earlier. 4 drafts. 4 months of planning. I closed the folder and said quietly that the document had been drawn up while I was still a minor. We were preparing for your future, she answered too fast. I asked if that meant using parental authority to control my inheritance. Her expression cracked slightly. Victor leaned in hard, telling me to sign the papers. I stayed calm and asked how long she'd known Vincent Blackwell. The kitchen went dead silent. She whispered that they'd never mentioned his name. I told her I knew. That's exactly what worried me. She tried her wounded voice again, saying I didn't understand how dangerous money could be at my age. I agreed, and for 1 second relief crossed her face, before I added that this was exactly why I'd already hired an attorney. Everything froze. My phone buzzed on the table. All 3 of them glanced down. Nathaniel Sterling calling right on schedule. My mother went pale and told me not to answer. I picked it up anyway, put it on speaker and greeted him. He wished me happy birthday and hoped he wasn't interrupting breakfast. I told him no, we were just discussing money. Excellent timing, he said, and confirmed the Eleanor Trust had completed its transfer successfully at 12:04 that morning. Fully funded, fully irrevocable. My mother dropped her fork. Victor's fists clenched. Cassidy asked what trust. Sterling explained calmly that it was a protected trust established solely for my benefit. Victor exploded, demanding answers, and Sterling simply advised him to choose his words carefully. Then he continued. As of midnight, the inheritance could no longer be transferred, reassigned, or controlled by any outside party. My mother looked at me like she'd never seen me before. Not the quiet, obedient daughter, but someone dangerous. He brought up the Blackwell paperwork next. The whistleblower, the complaint, the disciplinary board, laying it all out piece by piece. My mother begged him to stop, but he didn't. He explained exactly why the documents were unethical, why they targeted a minor, why they violated fiduciary duty, why Blackwell was already under investigation. Each sentence peeled back another layer of her composure. He asked if I could confirm the document in front of me. I looked down at the 12 pages and confirmed it. Cassidy covered her mouth. Victor muttered that this was a setup. Sterling corrected him instantly. A setup requires deception, and I'd simply read what was placed in front of me. I turned to my mother and asked if she'd known what was in those papers. Tears welled instantly. I asked again, yes or no. She broke and admitted yes. Cassidy made a small strangled sound. Victor slammed his hand on the table, accusing me of doing this behind their backs. I told him I'd handled my business legally at 1 minute past midnight, while he'd spent 4 months planning his behind mine, while I was still 17. His face went dark red as he said they'd raised me. I answered quietly that he'd moved in when I was 12. That silence hurt worse than any shouting. I opened to page 9 and read aloud the line about covering Cassidy's tuition. Nobody denied it. Nobody defended it either. I closed the folder and said I'd keep it. My mother started crying hard, real tears but familiar ones, the kind she used as tools, saying this was after everything she'd sacrificed. I told her softly that we needed professionals present before we used the word sacrifice. Sterling spoke again, letting me know my aunt was waiting at the end of the driveway. I stood, gathered my phone and the folder, put on my jacket. At the door I paused and told Cassidy she'd been 16, that none of this was her doing, and to text me in a year. She nodded, close to tears. Then I walked out into air that felt clean and honest for the first time in a long while. I thought leaving would end things. It only started the fallout. My aunt's apartment in Pittsburgh felt like a different universe. Warm blankets, cat hair, mismatched mugs, real laughter, no performances required. After my shower I checked my phone once. 47 missed calls, dozens of texts insisting my mother was devastated, that I needed to call home immediately, that I was breaking her heart, that the pastor wanted to talk. My aunt glanced over my shoulder and said one word: block. I asked if she meant all of them. She said yes, all of them. So I did, and slept 10 hours straight. Back home, my mother's version of events began falling apart. At church she cried publicly, calling me confused, claiming I'd abandoned the family. But too many odd comments, too many hints about money, too many witnesses from that country club dinner had already connected the dots. The town's judgment came quiet, not loud, but quiet judgment in a small town lingers forever. Cassidy bore the worst of the social fallout, whispered about by kids and parents alike, though most believed she hadn't known the full extent of it. Honestly, I believed that too. Then Victor's finances began collapsing fast. The inheritance had clearly been baked into his plans, and without it everything cracked. Loans, truck payments, equipment debt. Within weeks his truck was repossessed and his business started crumbling. My mother filed for financial separation almost immediately. The united family front dissolved into everyone fending for themselves. Funny how quickly greed turns partnership into paperwork. Bucknell fell through for Cassidy too. She lost her deposit, cried to admissions, and ended up choosing Penn State Harrisburg instead. Cheaper, safer. By May, Victor had moved into a rented room above a garage. My mother kept the house in name only. The bank effectively owned most of it. I never celebrated any of this. I want that understood clearly. I didn't destroy their lives, I simply stopped being their fix. Meanwhile, the disciplinary board investigated Vincent Blackwell. The whistleblower came forward, Other families followed and patterns emerged. Vanished educational trusts, manipulated family LLCs, exploited elderly clients. 8 weeks later he lost his law license for 3 years. The local paper buried the story on page 3, but in towns like mine, page 3 travels farther than any headline. Sterling forwarded me the article with no note attached. I replied with a simple thank you. Minutes later he wrote back that justice isn't loud. I saved that message because he was right. Real justice rarely shouts. It just keeps moving steadily toward daylight until nobody can look away from it anymore. In late May, Cassidy texted that she hadn't known her mother wanted all of it. She'd thought it was only ever about her own tuition, she swore. I sat with that message a long while before replying that I knew, that she'd been in the kitchen, not behind the paperwork. She apologized. I told her I knew that too. Then she suggested coffee in a year, once she was 18 and away from the house, and meant it. I almost cried when she called me by my old nickname again. She hadn't done that since our grandfather died. August brought move-in day at Penn State. My aunt helped pack everything into her car. My grandfather's lamp, my books, the cedar box, his letter, all of it coming with me. My roommate Delilah Parker hugged me within a minute of meeting me, loud and bright with no hidden emotional traps in her conversation. That first night she mentioned offhandedly that she barely spoke to her own mother either, and hearing another girl say something like that so casually eased something small and tight inside me. College changed me gradually, not all at once. I learned that silence could feel like peace instead of danger. Nobody punished me for laughing too loud. Nobody rolled their eyes at my excitement. Nobody turned my feelings into weapons. My mother texted twice that first semester asking if I was safe and later that she missed me. I didn't respond to either message, not out of hatred but because I'd finally understood that access to me was no longer automatic. That realization mattered more than the money ever had. Every Sunday my aunt called. One night she asked how my heart was doing. I looked around my dorm room, snow brushing the window, my roommate humming in the shower down the hall. No tension, no dread, no bracing for criticism. I told her honestly that it was quiet. She asked if it was good quiet or bad quiet. I smiled and said good quiet. She was silent a moment, then told me gently that was peace. I sat with that word a long time. My whole childhood, quiet had meant survival. Now it meant safety. That difference changed everything. A year to the day after I signed the trust papers, I sat alone in the campus library while late snow drifted past the windows. I pulled up the trust statement online. Tuition covered, housing covered, books covered, security and freedom all accounted for. At the bottom sat my grandparents' names, Theodore and Eleanor Whitmore, listed as the ones who'd started it all. I touched the screen lightly, then closed the laptop. Outside, snow fell slow beneath the campus lights. My phone buzzed with a text from Cassidy, a photo of her dorm room at Penn State Harrisburg, asking about coffee in May. I smiled and typed back that I'd drive. I slipped the phone into my pocket and stepped out into the cold night air. For the first time in my life, the future finally felt like mine. Not my mother's, not Victor's. My grandfather had been right the whole time. Your choice, your life. And at last I understood exactly what he'd meant.